all for having me this evening. This is going to be a packed hour and a half of practical information and information based on science. Whenever I speak to a group of individuals, I always add a little bit of science and a whole lot of real life. So what we're going to focus on tonight is parenting. And my agenda is this. We're going to talk about, kind of set the stage for parenting in the 21st century, what's going on now out there in terms of parenting and the challenges that we're facing. Then we're going to be talking about different styles of parenting and what style of parenting you want to gravitate towards in general. If you're looking at raising a child that has grit and resilience and self-confidence and is capable, that sort of thing. Then we're going to be talking about positive parenting and the nature of collaborative problem solving in the parenting relationship between the child and the parent. And when we're talking about that, we're going to start by discussing drugs and alcohol, and I'll establish kind of what's going on in our country nationally in relation to trends related to drug and alcohol use. And then we'll talk about positive parenting in relation to having those kinds of conversations with our kids about drugs and alcohol, how to do that, when to do that, and some of the pitfalls associated with trying to have those conversations. So very, very rich this evening. We're going to start by wrestling with a really challenging topic, and that topic is parenting in the 21st century. My job, and this is usually the way that I have my talks organized, is I'm going to rattle your cage tonight and kind of present my perspective on what we're struggling with in this country and in our culture in relation to parenting. And in the process of rattling your cage, I'm going to kind of bring you down a little bit, and then I'm going to pick you back up and I'm going to dust you off. And then you'll finish the talk tonight feeling very empowered and positive about what you can do. Okay, so how do we parent in the 21st century? And I would suggest to you that we are parenting desperately. And what I mean by that is that we're parenting as if our children's lives are a predetermined obstacle course, something that we have to navigate for them in order for them to ultimately be successful. And we're also parenting in a fashion that suggests that our kids' development is somewhat linear. So they're born and then they meet these milestones, and these milestones are very predictable and they happen at very predictable times. And then the ultimate milestone is graduation from high school. Then they go to a really good college and they get a great education and they graduate from college and they live happily ever after. I haven't met that child yet, but I would like to, if any of you happen to know a child that's developing in that nice, clear, predictable, linear fashion. So what I want to suggest to you guys tonight is that we are parenting desperately in three particular ways. The first way that we're parenting desperately is from a place of desperate love. And what I mean by that is we are desperate as parents these days for our children to be happy. We have this whole concept in our culture about happiness, and we feel as if our children aren't happy, then they're not going to be successful in life, and actually, them not being happy makes us uncomfortable. And what's happening is that as parents in this culture, we're becoming less and less tolerant of our children's discomfort. And it's actually discomfort that builds up grit and resilience and allows our children to be able to persevere in life. And they're going to have obstacles in life, and they're going to need to know how to get through those obstacles. They need to know how to fail and pick themselves back up. And when we're parenting from a place of desperate love, we're actually parenting in a way that makes us feel better, but puts our children at a disadvantage. The second way that we're parenting is from a place of desperate fear. And the fear is that our kids won't be successful without our involvement. They can't do it themselves, and failure is not an option. And there's a reason why we're parenting from that place. And the reason is that we have come to a place in our culture where we have expectations of our children starting in preschool that are not developmentally appropriate. So these children are in a position very early on, particularly in the academic environment, where they have expectations on their performance that they're not yet ready to accomplish. And so we as parents have to step in and somehow help them accomplish these things for fear that they're not going to be successful. I have parents that I know that are hiring educational consultants when their children are in elementary school. And these individuals are wonderful. They do a wonderful job and they play a very important role in our lives these days. However, they shouldn't be helping parents decide what college these children should go to in elementary school. And parents, it's not as if the educational consultants may not want to do that job, but parents want to start having those conversations very early on. So we're really in a position now as parents where we feel as if we have to manage our children's lives instead of allowing them to learn to manage their own. And then, so instead of preparing our children for life, what we're actually doing is we're protecting them from life. And I see this in my practice, and it's really heart-wrenching when you have these wonderful, and these kids out there are phenomenal kids. I mean, they really are. They're smart, they're creative, they think outside the box. They don't have the life experience, they don't have the grit and resilience to be able to persevere. And I see that in high school, I see that with my younger college kids, and even the kids coming out of college are faltering, really having a difficult time growing up. And finally, and this is a hard one to accept and digest, because it's very critical of us as parents, but we are parenting from a place of desperate ego. And what I mean by that is that our children's success is a reflection of our own worthiness. So in order for us to feel good as parents, and in order to us to feel worthy, we then have to parent in a way that our kids are successful. So we're hijacking our children's childhood. So if you have an elementary school child and you're parenting from a place of ego, you're going to take as much, you're going to be as involved and take as much responsibility for that child's 5 stars they get if they happen to behave civilly in the classroom as the actual child does. You're going to feel like you're actually the captain of the football team, and you're going to get involved at that level with your child instead of allowing your children to actually navigate these very developmentally appropriate things in their lives so that they build their sense of self and their sense of self-competence and confidence. So parenting has become a competitive sport. It really has. So parents themselves are very critical of one another. I know I experienced that somewhat in my community when I was raising my son, and my husband and I decided that we were going to raise our son from the perspective of, teach him values, teach him character, and if he, and then let him figure the rest out for himself with our support, obviously. So we were not chasing straight A's. We were not, we didn't require that our son had written a book by the time he was 13 and a half and was, captain of this and leader of that and, was responsible for this manifesto of some type. It was more like, no, you know what? We're going to ride out your ups and downs with you as parents. We're going to love you. We're going to be supportive of you. And you're going to find your level. You're going to find where you need to be at any stage in your development. We made a bunch of mistakes, and I want to make sure that everybody realizes that we all make a bunch of mistakes, and somehow, some way, our children get through, and most of them do really quite fine. So we need to be, as parents in this day and age, also very gentle with ourselves. So, did I parent from a place of fear? Did I parent from a place of ego? Did I parent from a place of love? No question, no question. So what you want to try to do as a parent is to minimize the mistakes, and if you're making mistakes, make sure they're not consistent mistakes, because that's when they tend to influence your children. So sometimes you are going to parent from a place of ego, but if it's unusual for you to parent from that place, it's likely not going to have the greatest of impact on your child. If you are always parenting from a place of ego, then it is going to have a significant influence. So that's where we need to be very gentle on ourselves and real with ourselves. Okay? So it hasn't always been this way. It's really through the baby boomer generation that we've gotten to this place where we're over-parenting. So it used to be back in my generation, when I'm 55, so I'm a baby boomer. When I was growing up, what our parents did was they under-parented. It was kind of like, well, 8 a.m. in the morning, we'll see you for dinner. And we're really not interested in what you're doing, and don't bother us. And you know, if you break your arm, ride your bike to the hospital. I'm exaggerating, obviously, for clarity. My parents were not, negligent, but it was, we kind of got the message as baby boomers that we weren't a priority necessarily. It was really more of an adult world, and we were children, and there were some real benefits to that. And one of the benefits was that we did have the opportunity to build up an awful lot of grit and resilience. Then we came into parenting and we're like, you know what? I'm going to be there every moment of every day for my kid. I'm going to know where they are. I'm going to know the names of all their teachers, and I'm going to know what all their assignments are. I'm just, because I didn't have that. So we sort of boomeranged back the other direction. A few other things that have influenced where we are today that I think is just fascinating actually started, let me just find the date on this for you. So when you underparent, you communicate to your child that your needs are more important than their needs are. When you overparent, which is what we're doing now, you communicate to your children that they're not capable of handling life themselves, and they need you to be okay. So, and we're seeing this. We're seeing this loud and clear with our children. They're really having a difficult time taking over and really standing on their own 2 feet. So this kind of all started with the abduction of Adam Walsh. If you guys are of the generation, you remember America's Most Wanted was started by Adam's father. He was abducted and was killed, actually. And there was a movie made about his abduction and his death. And that movie was seen by over 38 million people in this country. And most of those people were baby boomers. There were about 78 million baby boomers. And it changed the landscape of parenting. So we all went and saw that movie, and then it was like, oh my God, our kids are in danger. There's strangers everywhere, and so we have to keep our eye on them. We have to lock our doors. We can't let them out by themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So that was sort of the beginning. Then the next thing was a report that came out that stated that our children were falling behind academically in relation to the rest of the world. That led to No Child Left Behind, and there was another one, No Child Left Behind. You guys remember what the other? I'll think of it in a second. And what happened there was all of a sudden the academic environment started to shift, and our kids were coming home with more and more homework and more homework and more homework, and they were getting overwhelmed, and the expectations of them started to escalate so that they weren't academically prepared to perform. So we as parents were freaking out because they were coming home with a couple hours of homework and they weren't ready to even perform on their homework. I actually have a funny anecdote I read about this physician who had 3 kids, and he's telling the story in this article I was reading, and he said one night was a particularly bad night, and they'd been running around taking care of, the sports and the this and the that, and they came home and all 3 kids had tons of homework. He had a little elementary school, he had a middle school, and he had a high school. So he said, okay, this is what we're going to do. He said to the youngest one, the elementary school, he said, you are going to bed, like you're out. So he sent that one to bed. He said to the middle school child, you're going to do the elementary school child's homework because I know you can do that unsupervised. Then he said to the high school student, you're going to do the middle school student. And then he said, I'm going to do your homework. And that's how he handled it. And everybody got their homework done one way or the other, and they all got to bed on time. So, and he was, you know, he was saying, look, I don't want to be in this position. I don't want to be sitting with my kids doing their homework every night. I want them to handle it themselves, but they can't. So I'm in a position where I have to take charge. And that was that night anyway. That's how he ended up taking charge. So how do you think this overparenting causes our children to feel? Do they feel strong and powerful and capable and confident and fearless? They don't. They don't feel that way. They feel dependent. They feel incapable. They feel scared. They feel anxious. You guys see the cover story a couple weeks ago in the New York Times, Sunday New York Times Magazine about the rise of anxiety disorders in our children. Seeing it in my practice. Kids are actually diagnosing themselves and coming in and saying, Dr. Farrell, I think I have an anxiety disorder. Most of them don't. That's a whole nother talk. We're kind of, you know, and I will mention it here just to plant a seed with you guys, that we're calling nervousness and, you know, age-appropriate nervousness anxiety, and we need to stop doing that. There's a difference. And what we're doing is we're normalizing anxiety. Like everybody's got an anxiety disorder, and actually most of it is just kids feeling nervous about the fact that they've got to go to the, you know, go eat in a cafeteria. Well, who didn't feel that way, right? So anyway, just playing the scene with you, that's a different talk, but normalizing this concept of nervousness and stress, that we all feel this. And anxiety is something that's another level up. And an anxiety disorder is, once again, a whole nother level up. So just to plant a seed, but our kids definitely, I am experiencing many more kids that have generalized anxiety disorders. Our kids are angry. They're entitled because they're scared. They feel like, well, it's always been done for me. Why all of a sudden are you telling me I have to do it myself? They're depressed. They feel fooled because what we've been telling them throughout their childhood is, if you do this, Johnny, everything's going to be fine. If you do that, if you just get the good grades, if you just do this, if you just do that, you'll get into a good college, you'll get a good education, and everything will be fine. What a bunch of crap. That isn't the truth. In fact, a lot of these kids, millennials, they marched through, got out, couldn't get a job. How do you think that felt? They gave up their childhood, in a sense. They worked. They're totally burned out, a lot of these kids. A lot of the high achievers are completely fried when they end up in college. And then they burn themselves out in college. They get out, and then they can't get a job, or they get a job without health insurance, or they get a job for $25,000 a year, and they have $1,500 a month in loans. They feel fooled, they feel angry, and they feel cheated. The Pew Research Survey, they surveyed the millennials. Millennials are the kids born in 1980 to 2000. And what they found was that the millennials think less of themselves and are more critical of themselves than all generations going back to 1934. Wow. That's sad. That's really sad. So, in order to start to understand the true long-term effects of overparenting, we have to look at the millennials and see how they're faring on college campuses across the United States. And there was a survey that was done back in 2013 by the American College Health Association. And what they did was they surveyed 100,000 college students on 153 different campuses in the 50 states. So it was a really well done, very diverse survey. And all they did was they asked these kids about their mental health. How are you feeling? Now, think back to these days when you guys were in college or you had friends. This is a good time in your life. First of all, you're not totally independent. You probably have a little job. It's probably not a big deal. You've got your classes to go to. And otherwise, you're really just sort of getting to know yourself. You're experimenting. And we won't mention all the different things you might be doing, but you might probably having a relatively good time. Listen to how our college students feel. This is shocking. 84% felt overwhelmed by all that they had to do. 79% felt exhausted, and not from physical activity, emotionally exhausted. 60% felt very sad. 60%. That's over 50,000 of these 100,000 said they felt very sad. 57 felt very lonely. We're actually, as adults in this country right now, having a loneliness epidemic. People are lonely. They're isolated and they're lonely. You think with technology we're all connected. Not true. We're actually very isolated and we feel very alone. Well, they're experiencing that as well at their age. 51% felt overwhelming anxiety. Half of these college students. 46% felt things were hopeless. Hopeless. 38% felt overwhelming anger. This one kills me. 31% felt so depressed that it was difficult to function. 8% had seriously considered suicide. 6.5% intentionally cut or otherwise injured themselves. And what's not included in here are the percentage of kids who are abusing drugs and alcohol, which is in epidemic proportions in this country right now. Okay. Wow. Isn't that something? Take a minute and just sit with that for a second. We got a problem, right? We've got a problem. So what we really need to be talking about is a philosophical, fundamental shift in the way that we are parenting our children. Because let me tell you, the kids, this is not the kids' fault. It's not like we have this generation of kids that are genetically predisposed to be impossible to motivate and just naturally depressed and anxious. This is not the case. It's actually our fault. Okay? It's our fault. And our fault as parents, and not alone as parents, it's our fault as a culture. All right? Because there are lots of things that influence our children, not just our parenting. Okay? So our fundamental responsibility is not to make sure that Johnny gets an A in AP Bio so he can go to a good college. Our fundamental responsibility is to make sure that when Johnny fails AP Bio, he knows he can handle it. What's at the root of all of this struggle for these kids is that they don't believe they can handle it. It being whatever, a breakup in a relationship, their academic responsibilities, employment, bills, a car accident, you name it. Whatever life has to deal to them, they don't feel like they can handle it. Our fundamental responsibility is to make sure that Susie knows that she doesn't have to be perfect to be happy and successful in life. We are very intolerant of imperfection these days, which is crazy because we're all imperfect. In fact, that's what makes us interesting. It makes it fun and interesting to be around people that have a personality of their own, that have had adventures, that have failed and picked themselves. Don't we love these stories? We love these stories, right? Yet we are communicating to our children that they need to be perfect in order to survive in this world. Another place where the anxiety is coming forth. Our responsibility is to communicate to Jimmy that he can solve his own problems and make his own decisions. And we're going to talk about collaborative problem solving and how that influences the development of our children's ability to problem solve. Kids aren't learning. One of the fundamental ways that children learn to problem solve is by playing. And do you know what we have in this country right now? We have what Diane Levin calls a play deficit. These kids don't know how to play. If you talk to any preschool teacher, the kids that are coming into preschool these days, they have no idea how to free play. Either they need to be told what to do, or they just want to sit in front of a screen, or they'll just sit, like you put some blocks next to them, they're like, I don't really know what you're asking me here. You know, what am I going to do with that? One of the reasons that this technology is obviously one of the big reasons for this. The other reason is the play date. So back in 1988 was the play date was born, and the reason it was born was because women were going into the workforce in droves, and they had a limited amount of time. And because of the abduction of Adam Walsh, they wanted to supervise their children all the time. So we got this thing called the play date. And what's the play date? The play date is a bunch of parents, mothers or fathers, sitting together while the kids play right next to them. Well, what started to happen with the play date? The adults started getting involved in the play. And it's like, oh, Johnny, why are you stacking your blocks like that? Why don't you try color coding your blocks? And Johnny's like, oh, okay. You know, and then so Johnny takes your direction. Or, you know, Jimmy and Johnny are having an argument. And you're like, oh, no, kids, none of that now. We're not having any arguments. They don't get an opportunity to sort it out themselves and figure out how to solve a problem, how to make decisions together. Play is critical to problem-solving ability, development of problem-solving ability. The other two deficits that we're seeing with our children is a compassion deficit. So we're seeing a play deficit, we're seeing a compassion deficit. So our children are actually lower on the empathetic scale than generations prior. Now, children are hard-coded for empathy. They're born with empathy. One of the reasons that we're seeing a deficit in empathy is because of technology. It's because first they're interacting with games and apps that don't encourage empathy. We see when they do interact with games and apps that actually are written to encourage empathy, the empathy scale goes up. But many of the kinds of things that they're watching are not. Many of them are violent. They're interacting on social media. Much of what's on social media is not about compassion and civility and empathy. It's not. It's about judgment and criticism and competitiveness. We have this sense that there is a scarcity. I find this fascinating. We have this sense that there is a scarcity of opportunities and resources for everybody in this country, in the United States. So we have this sense as parents that there are only a handful of colleges that our kids could possibly go to and get a good education and get out and be successful, when there are thousands of colleges and universities that our children could go to and get a fabulous education and be very successful in life. We have this sense that there's a scarcity of opportunity, for even relationships. It's just crazy. And we're behaving that way in this culture. And it's becoming a culture of uncivil behavior, both coming from adults and from our children. And that's something that we really, is very, very concerning, that we need to do something about. Okay. And last two things I want to mention that really represent that fundamental shift in responsibility as parents. That Mary knows that getting to know yourself takes a lifetime. And just because she doesn't know what she wants to do when she's 16, that she's going to be okay. We have this sense, these children think, and they sit on my couch all the time and they tell me, they have expectations like they feel shame at 14, 15, 16, 17, that they don't know what they want to do with their lives. It's like, whoa, what? Are you kidding me? I just figured it out 10 years ago. That was when I was 45. I mean, right? We know as adults that our development continues throughout our entire lives. Why are we trying to cram our kids' development into their first 18 years, and then somehow you're hard-coded, ready to go, and now you're like, okay, good, go ahead, enjoy your life. What? And this is their expectation of themselves. And this is how we're talking to them. We ask them questions like that. Well, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? What? I don't know. All I can tell you is what I'm going to do tonight. I have no idea what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, right? And finally, that Sammy knows that he is worthy of love, because love and connection is what makes the world go round. And our children somehow are getting the message And I think it's coming out of this expectation of perfection and the fact that they can't make mistakes and fail, that they are not worthy. I'm getting so many kids these days that don't feel worthy of love and affection, that don't believe in their own value. They're being measured based on things like grades, like accomplishment. We have this accomplishment culture in our country. And if you're not accomplishing, you're not of value. So this is something that I want to do a TED Talk on. And that is, we have got to start bringing back average. So most everything, when you research it, it comes out on a bell curve. So you've got some people on one end, you've got some people on the other end, and the great majority are in the middle. Well, I hate to tell you guys, but most of us are relatively average, okay? Because there isn't room for a lot of really exceptional individuals on that end. Now, you may be a little further on the above average side, good for you, but the great majority of us are average. What happened to average? It's like what's happened to the bell curve is it's flattened out. So now what we've done is we've crammed as many people as we possibly can through the force of expectations and nature. We're trying to create this generation of all exceptional human beings that are all at the top of the curve, right? And then there's everybody else. So like if you're not up here, if you're not getting that really high grade point average as a kid, and you're not overachieving here, and you're not in the school play as the lead, and you're getting the awards on your softball team, and you're not doing this and that, then you're down here. It's not as if, okay, well that's all right, because you're doing this other stuff pretty good, right? You're falling right there in the bell curve where most, no. It's like if you're not here, you aren't worthy. And that's what the kids are feeling. That's a horrible way to feel, especially when the great majority are not way up here. Now, let's just talk about average, because everyone's like, oh my God, I get this all the time. I go, oh, Dr. Farrell, you're suggesting that we should lower the bar and encourage our children to be average? No, why don't you let your children be children and see what they do? Have expectations, obviously. I mean, that's your job as parents. You need boundaries, you need expectations. Base those on your value system, not on your competitive nature with the guy next door and the parent who's saying, yeah, Johnny's got straight A's, he's got a full ride to Harvard. Well, you know what percentage of individuals in this country get to go to Harvard? It's under 1%, right? So predicate your boundaries and expectations on your family values. Think for yourself. Know your child. Do you have a naturally cautious child that's introverted? You're going to parent that child differently. Do you have a child that's very extroverted, that's very risk-taking? Do you have a child that's brilliant? Do you have a child that's average academically but is really artistic? Parent that child that way. So for example, I'll give you an example with my son. So he hated French, right? And in Old Saybrook, they started a language in kindergarten, and it alternates years. And the year that he came in, that was a French year, so he had French. Well, first of all, he was miserable at languages, and he hated French. So here he is in high school, he's a sophomore in high school, and he's taken French again. And he's sitting at the dining room table studying for an exam, and he's just beside himself. I said, what's going on, honey? I'm using some this is what collaborative problem solving sounds like. I said, what's the problem? Well, I hate the teacher. Really? Okay. Is that really the problem? Well, no, I actually hate French. I said, okay, now we're getting down to it, So I don't blame you. French is, if you're not good at languages, French is probably the worst language to take, because this well, maybe German, is really challenging. And so I said, well, what do you want to do about that? Well, I can't do anything. I don't have a choice. I got to take it. I said, well, you do. You're right. You do have to take it. But you do have choices. What are some of the choices that you think you might have? And of course, he had no answer. He's an adolescent boy. He's saying, well, I don't know. And why are we having this conversation? And I don't even know what we're talking about, right? So collaborative problem solving in that case requires a little more parental structure. So I said to him, well, look, what are your expectations of yourself in this class? And he said, well, you know, I feel like I need to do really well in there. And I said to him, well, how well do you really need to do? He said, well, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to get an A. And I said, well, okay. Why do you want to get an A in French? You like history. You like English. You like some of these other subjects. What about a B in French? What about taking a little bit of that energy that you're sitting here and you're channeling into being miserable, studying for this French exam, and channel that into some of your other academic pursuits? And just study well enough to get a B. Now, I'm sure there are parents out there that are horrified with that suggestion. But think about this. Isn't that what we all do? Isn't that the real world? So if I start running, am I going to train for a marathon? Well, if I want to run a marathon, I will. But if I don't want to run a marathon, I'm just going to run. And maybe I'm going to decide I'm just going to run a mile because I want to have enough energy to make dinner that night. Don't we take our energy, which we have a very limited amount of, and we channel it into the things that are most important to us? We don't try to do everything perfectly and get straight A's in everything that we do in life. That isn't what we do. We get to know ourselves and we decide where we want to put our energy based on our values, based on our talents. So, end of the story is, encourage my son to just make those decisions for yourself. Decide what you want your performance to be. And lo and behold, when you do that, you tend to do better at that thing you don't like to do because you're not channeling you're not pushing against it, you're actually going with it. And sure enough, he didn't get an A because he didn't want to put that kind of energy in. He got a nice solid B in French. Beautiful. Do you think he'll ever speak French in the rest? He couldn't speak a word of French. He'd been taking it since he was in elementary school. He just had to get out, right? Is that the end of the world? No. I'm sorry, it just isn't, okay? So, again, we want to make sure that our children understand the importance of establishing priorities and channeling your energy into what's important to you, and that you do not have to be perfect. Okay, here is the intrinsic purpose of parenting and the way to do it. And this is the practical path to establishing independence with our children, teaching our children to be independent. So this is what we do. First, we do it for them. So let's take tying shoes as an example. First, you allow your child to tie you tie their shoes for them because they're not developmentally ready to learn to tie them. You try to teach a 6-month-old how to tie their shoes and you're probably not going to be successful, okay? So you're going to do it for them first. Then you do it with them. So as you start to see, like right before you think your children can do something, a task of some type, you're going to actually sit with them and start to show them and talk to them and say, hey, why don't you hold that end, and I'm going to wrap this, and they're not doing it themselves, you don't have any expectations, you're just doing it with them. Then when you know that they're developmentally ready, to the best of your ability, you're going to make mistakes, okay? Then you're actually going to teach them to do it and watch them do it. So you're going to sit with them and you're going to coach them and you're going to say, oh, you almost got it. You know how that kind of slipped out. Try it again. All right, remember, you're going to put this under that, and maybe you have a little song or whatever you're doing. So you sit with them and you coach them. You don't do it for them. You just encourage them and you coach them. And then when they've learned to do it, you do not do it for them. So when they can tie their shoes for themselves, they tie their shoes for themselves. So one of the fundamental mantras of parenting we got to get back to is don't do for your children what they can do for themselves. So ask yourself at every developmental stage, what is my child capable of doing? And give them that responsibility. Teach them how to do it first, watch them do it, coach them, and then have them do it themselves. Now, if you have ever seen your child, and I'll give you an example. All right, so let's say you're in the kitchen and you're cooking, and your child comes walking through, let's say they're in middle school, early high school, and you're trying to open a pickle jar. And the pickle jar is stuck, because you know pickle jars get stuck because of the sugary, and they get, you know, and you're like, oh my God, you cannot get those things open, right? So you try and you can't do it. And so let's say you have a son, and he's walking through the kitchen, and you say, hey, could you open this pickle jar for me? And of course the son's gonna be like, well, yeah, of course I can. And they grab it, and they can't do it, right? So they try a few times, they get frustrated, and they say, sorry, I can't do it, and they try and hand it back to you. If you're using positive parenting, collaborative problem solving, and you're not going to overparent, you're not going to take that pickle jar back. It sounds like this silly example, but these little things make a huge difference in our children's lives. So instead, you're going to say to your child, sorry, I'm cutting up vegetables right now. You're going to need to figure out how to open that pickle jar. Well, I don't know how to open it. It's stuck. What am I supposed to do? So now you coach them, and you say, well, what I normally do is it gets stuck because there's sugar in the juice, and it dries, and run it under some hot water and see if that doesn't work. And then turn your back, like you're not even watching. You're paying attention though, because you can't help yourself. And so then they run it under the hot water, and sure enough, doom, it opens up. What do you think your child experiences in that moment when they open that pickle jar? And then they tap you on the shoulder, and say, Mom, I've got it open. And you turn around and you say, oh my God, that's so awesome. That was really helpful to me. Thank you so much for opening that. Because I was really, if I didn't get these veggies done, they were going to burn, and I couldn't do both. What does that feel like? Are you kidding me? That child is going to be puffed up, right? They're going to be like, I can handle it. I can handle it. And you may even say again to them a little later on, and they may think you're silly, but you may just in passing say to them, hey, I just want to mention again, thanks so much for getting that pickle jar open for me. That was awesome. They're going to feel good about themselves. They're going to feel capable. They're going to feel respected. They're going to feel useful. They're going to feel like they have purpose and value. You want to look for opportunities like that with your children all the time. Look for opportunities to hand back responsibility to them, whether it's emotional, whether it's practical, right? If you do that as often as you can do it, you're going to raise a child, by the nature of them having to engage that way in their lives, that has the grit and resilience to figure things out, even in very difficult times like the ones that we're living in right now. Okay. All right. So let's switch now. Let me talk to you a little bit about parenting styles, and then we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about using positive parenting and collaborative problem solving to talk to our kids about drugs and alcohol. And then I'll answer questions from you. All right, so our children all grow up within a structure. So our job as parents is to provide a structure at home, and that structure, the purpose of that structure is to allow them to experiment, to falter, to pick themselves back up, to get to know themselves. And there are 4 identified structures, and we all probably parent in all 4 ways at different times, but there is one parenting style that is one of the most beneficial to our children. So let's talk about the 3 that are not so beneficial, and then we'll talk about the one that we want to focus on. So there is an authoritarian style parenting, and the authoritarian style parenting is militaristic. It's very right and wrong, very black and white, do it my way or the highway. These kids don't get to think for themselves. Their parents tell them, this is how you're going to keep your room clean, and if you don't, these are the consequences. We're not having discussion. Very little flexibility in an authoritarian approach. What we find with kids that are raised in very authoritarian environments is that they tend to be angry. When they reach their teen years, they tend to break out. They tend to engage in far more risky behavior. They have low self-esteem. They are not very good at solving their own problems and making decisions because they haven't had those experiences. Not a preferred way of parenting. Now, do we have to parent sometimes in an authoritarian way? Authoritarian parenting is really predicated on a punishment style. So when you punish your child, you call them names, you might hit them, you have expectations and boundaries and consequences that you don't discuss with them. So it comes out of the blue for them. Like they think they're not doing anything all that bad, and all of a sudden you come down on them and they're like, what do you mean you're taking my phone away? We never talked about this. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm in charge. I'm the parent. I can do whatever the hell I want. So you just did that. I'm taking your phone away for a week. That's authoritarian parenting. So there's no, in that form of parenting, the child does not feel respected. And if you want to have a healthy relationship with your child, and one where you can have conversations, like difficult ones about drugs and alcohol, you want to have a respectful base. You want them to respect you to the most degree. There are going to be moments, of course, and you want to be respectful towards them as well. In an authoritarian parenting style, respect takes a really hard hit. Kids like to know. They like to know what your expectations are. They like to know what the boundaries are. They like to know what the consequences are. And that's positive parenting. When you parent that way, then the consequences become natural. And what you want is you want natural consequences. You want your children to experience the natural consequences of their behavior. So if you're going to the grocery store and you've got a couple young kids and you say to them, look, this is my expectation of what I expect that you're going to stay in the cart and that you're not going to, be disruptive to other people. We're in a public environment. We're going to get in, we're going to get out. And if you choose, so this is the other aspect of positive parenting, you're not the authority, right? You're in charge, but you're not the authority. They're making choices for themselves because they know what the consequences are going to be. So you say to them, if you choose to behave this way in the grocery store, this is what is going to happen. Then when they choose to behave that way in the grocery store, you say to them, so you understand that you just chose not to watch your favorite show tonight. Oh, what are you talking about? I can't believe you do that. I understand you're upset, but we discussed this ahead of time, and you had a choice. You could have chosen not to behave that way, and had you'd be watching your show tonight. So you hear how that's different, rather than saying, you little pain in the, I can't, what are you, acting like an animal in the grocery store, and wait till your father comes home, he's gonna, blah, blah, blah. And the kid's like, what are you talking about? See how now you've lost control. What happens to the child's behavior when you lose control? They start to act out even more, and pretty soon you're grabbing that kid and running out of the grocery store because you're embarrassing yourself and everybody else around you. All right? So, structure. So you have the authoritarian approach. When you parent through an authoritarian style of parenting, what you end up doing is raising a child that has an external locus of control. Okay? And an external locus of control is simply this, and I'll give you a very simple example of it. You have a child, they go take an exam. They don't do well on the exam. They come home and all they do is they rail about the fact that the teacher sucks and they don't know what they're doing, and I did that whole review sheet and half that stuff wasn't even on the exam. There was stuff we didn't even talk about. It wasn't even in the book. I mean, how am I supposed to do well? That is an example of an external locus of control. The fundamental belief system is that I'm not in charge, I can't handle it, it's everyone else's fault. That is what we're seeing with the millennials. This external locus of control, like I don't have any control over anything. I don't have any influence over anything. Now, if you have an internal locus of control and you took that same exam and you didn't do well, you're going to come home and you're going to say, gosh, I don't know what happened. I did the review sheet. I spent 2 hours studying for that exam. I went to the review session. I did everything, and I thought I really knew the material, and I didn't do well on the exam. And as a positive parent that's using collaborative problem solving, you're going to say, well, that's interesting, honey. What are you going to do about that? And a child that has an internal locus of control is going to say, you know, I think I need to go talk to my teacher. I'm going to stay after class tomorrow. I'm going to go sit with them and just ask them, what did I do wrong here? Because I'm really confused. I thought I did everything I needed to perform well, and I didn't. So do you have any suggestions for me? Because that individual believes that they can elicit change in their lives. They believe that they can take control, that they are capable of influencing their own success, their own quality of life. So authoritarian parenting tends to engender an external locus of control. And we'll talk about authoritative parenting in a minute. That tends to engender an internal locus of control. So the other two parenting styles that you want to try to avoid as much as possible, which we all do to some degree, is first is a permissive, indulgent parenting style. And permissive indulgent is like this. You have a child who, let's say they've been playing video games for 5 hours, and you're just letting them, they get to play as much as they want, whenever they want. And in addition to that, you're going in every hour or so and saying, hey, can I get you something to drink? Hey, do you need some popcorn? Can I make you a ham sandwich? That's permissive indulgent. So not only are you allowing your child to do whatever they want, even if it isn't healthy for them, but you're actually supporting them in their effort to do whatever they want, even when it's not healthy for them. That's permissive indulgent. I see a lot of that kind of parenting because what we're trying to do is make our kids happy, right? Remember that? We're parenting from a place of desperate love. And that tends to lead us towards a permissive indulgent type of parenting. The other parenting style is permissive indifferent. And that's when you allow your kids to do whatever they want to do, and you really don't care. You really just don't pay a lot of attention. Your needs tend to be more important than their needs are. That's the permissive indifferent. You're just sort of indifferent to them, like, yeah, Johnny, go ahead, play video games. And you might say, you know what, I'm going to go for a bike ride for the next 5 hours. I'll be back. See you later. And you're not really, you just don't really care a whole lot. As long as they're out of your hair, you're good to go. So that's more the permissive indifferent. All right, so the piece de resistance in parenting is the authoritative approach of parenting. And that is a combination of you being in charge, which is you knowing what your values are, having boundaries and expectations, but being flexible. That's the key word when it comes to authoritative parenting, is flexibility. And the flexibility comes in the form of collaborative problem solving. So you're going to allow your children to have a voice. You're always going to reserve the right to say no or to take control in a situation, but you're always, not in every situation, but as much as possible, you're going to engage your children in a problem-solving process. So if you have a child, and you can do it with a child even that's really quite young, who tends to act out at the grocery store, what you would do is you would say, I love going to the grocery store with you, honey. You're so helpful. When you're calm and you're behaving, you're so helpful, and I could really use the help. But the problem is that sometimes it's difficult, right? I know, I understand. Sometimes it's hard. I take you after school and you're a little hungry or you're tired, and it's hard. I know it's hard to be quiet. So what I'm thinking is, I want you to come with me because I love having you there and you're a really big help. So I'm wondering if we can't figure this out. Like, what could we do to make this better for you? And then you start the back and forth, and the child says, well, you could give me a bag of jelly beans, and that way I could just sit in the cart and eat the bag of jelly beans. You could say, well, all right, that's a suggestion. You don't have to say, well, what, are you out of your mind? Jelly beans are going to add sugar to the situation? I don't think so. You're not even going to say that. You're just going to say, well, that's interesting, jelly beans, okay. And then you come up with a suggestion, and you say, how about I bring one of your little books with us, and you could look at your book while I grocery shop. And the kid's like, I don't know about that. That doesn't really sound good to me. All right, well, what's another idea? And you back and forth, and then you together you narrow it down to a couple of possible solutions, and then you decide to try them. So the next time you're going to the grocery store, you say, what do you think? Do you think you could be calm today? Yeah, I think I can. Oh, good, because I really want to take you to the grocery store with me because you're so helpful. And so remember what we talked about last week? We kind of had a plan in place, right? So remember we agreed that what we were going to do is I was going to give you a little bag of goldfish, and we're going to bring a book too. We're going to use both of those solutions. So why don't you grab the book, I'll put some goldfish in a bag, and we'll be ready to go. Sound good? Yeah, that sounds great. And you get in the car, and before you get out of the car at the grocery store, you just, real quick, just remind, remember, we got, if you start to feel like let me know, let me know. Now, come on. Life's not perfect. Oftentimes you're going to do everything you can, and you will have done the problem solving, and the kid's still going to act out, because that's what kids do. You provide the structure, and their job is to try to break it down. So get used to that, right? That's just what kids do. But that's okay. So if it's successful, you reinforce the success. If it's not successful, you do not shame the child. You don't call them names, you don't punish them. Punishment being that you have consequences you have not discussed. If you have consequences in place and they know those consequences, you follow through on those. Otherwise, what you do is you have conversation with them. One of the things that you can do is instill a natural consequence. And let me give you an example of a natural consequence in this case. A natural consequence would be this. 3 days later, you're going to the grocery store again. And your child sees you getting ready to go. And they say, oh, Mommy, I want to go to the grocery store with you. And you say, no, honey, not today. That's all you say. And they say, why? Why can't I go to the grocery store? I really want to go. I'm a lot of help. Why can't I come? And you say, well, why do you think you can't come this time? Kids are smart, much smarter than you think. And they'll say, oh, because the other day I kind of wasn't able to hold it together. And you say, yeah, it was a tough day that time, right? So Mommy's just going to go this time, and you can go next time. No, I swear to God, I will behave. I won't do anything. And you stick to your guns, and you're very respectful and loving, and you say, you know what, I'm going to really miss you. And I'm looking forward to when you can come with me, and you can help me. But not this time. That's a natural consequence. They're going to feel that because they want to be with you. They want to make you happy. They want you to be proud of them. And so that little, very respectful boundary where you're like, no, not this time. And then when you come home, you say, boy, I really missed you. I hope next time you'll be able to come. Do you think you can? Oh, yeah. And you try again. All right? So do you kind of get it? See how that feels? It feels good, right? Wouldn't we like other people to handle us that way? Wouldn't that just feel nice? It's respectful, it's loving. You stay in control, but you're very firm. The other thing about being firm like that and having clear boundaries and expectations is that structure causes your children to feel safe. They feel safe. They know that if they're outside of their zone and they're behaving in a way that's not appropriate, that's not safe for them, that you are going to step in and take charge. If you're a permissive indifferent parent or a permissive indulgent parent, those children don't know that. They don't know. They can't expect you to be there that way. You might be there sometimes that way, but for the majority of the time, as a permissive parent, you're not. So those children tend to be insecure in different ways than the authoritarian kind of kids. Make sense? Okay. All right. So let's talk about drugs and alcohol for a second. Because here's the thing. How do these two things relate to one another? What we've been talking about in relation to the parenting shift that we need to make and what we're going to now be discussing. And the way those two things are related to one another is one of the ways that you can stack the deck against your child using drugs and alcohol is by having an open, positive, and respectful relationship with them. Now, there are no guarantees. You could just be the perfect, lovely, authoritative parent and you've done everything right and your child can still use drugs and alcohol, can still become an addict. I mean, there's no guarantee. We know that. We have to accept that. There are lots of things in life that are that way. But certainly, the better your relationship with your child, the more likely it is that they're not going to end up abusing drugs and alcohol. Okay, so let's look at the landscape in the country first, and then we'll drill it down to the state of Connecticut, and then we'll talk about parenting. All right, so the illicit drug use in the United States has increased since 2002, and the primary increase in illicit drug use is because the increase in marijuana use in this country. Okay, so it's, and we expect the increase to continue due to the legalization of both medicinal marijuana and recreational marijuana. The use of drugs other than marijuana has actually stabilized or declined over the past decade. And we're talking about things like hallucinogens, cocaine, pain relievers, that kind of thing. Now, we have an opioid epidemic in this country. Great majority of the individuals that are addicted to opioids were not experimenting with the drug as a recreational drug. Most of these individuals were actually using the drug as a form of pain relief due to injury or medical procedures and became addicted to it in that fashion. All right, just to clarify. Most people use drugs for the first time as teenagers, and most drug use is highest among individuals that are teens and tweens. Now, what's really interesting in this country right now is that the population of individuals where we're seeing the most exponential increase in drug use is individuals in their 50s and 60s. Yep, baby boomer generation. We're seeing a lot of marijuana use in my generation, in addition to opioid addiction. Yeah, drug use is increasing among people in their 50s and early 60s. It's historically higher than in any other previous generations. More than half of all the new illicit drug users begin with marijuana. And this is very important to point out because we have this misconception in our country that marijuana is a harmless drug. The drug that we assume is harmless is the marijuana from the 1970s. The marijuana from the 1970s had anywhere between 1 and 3% THC. Marijuana today has anywhere from 15 to 30% THC. And when the kids are doing dabs, which is a very concentrated form, anywhere between 80 and 90% THC. THC is the cannabinoid in marijuana that provides the high, that gets you high. You have THC receptors in your brain and also in other parts of your body. And there are many other cannabinoids in marijuana, like CBD, that do not create a high, but do have, we think, medicinal purposes. And it's tonight, I mean, this is something that we could talk about at length. I'll just point to the fact that we put the cart before the horse in this country in terms of legalizing marijuana, recreational and medical marijuana. Because of the way that the FDA handled marijuana as a drug, they made it a Schedule I drug, so we couldn't do research on it all of these years. And because of that, we don't know a lot about what the medicinal benefits and risks are associated with the drug. So even though we're calling marijuana a medicine, it is not a medicine. The FDA has not approved it as a medicine. It is, in fact, recreational marijuana sold as a medicine. Now, it is, the growers are able to engineer it, and they can increase and decrease the levels of THC and CBD, and not lawfully. But let me tell you, none of this is regulated. So you don't know for sure what it is you're getting. You also don't know, because we haven't been able to do the research, you don't know what the interactions are going to be to other medications that you're taking, to your age, to other conditions that you might have. So for example, marijuana has a tendency to increase your heart rate. If you're older and you have heart disease and you're smoking marijuana, you might be putting yourself at risk for a heart attack. If you're a child and you have a heart condition that you may not even be aware of, you may be putting yourself at risk. There's so many things that we don't know, and it's such a shame that we've done what we've done in this country, because there does appear to be some very powerful medicinal properties to this drug. Many of them do not require you to get high. So it's very complicated, very, very complicated issue. But what I want you to understand is that the drug of today, the marijuana of today, is very different. It is addictive. We can stop having that argument. There's plenty of research showing that it's addictive. Now, are you going to have withdrawals like you do from heroin, where you're curled up in a ball and you're shaking and sweating and throwing up? No, that isn't going to happen. The withdrawals are going to be relatively minor, but they are going to be significant in the sense that you will experience physical withdrawals from the drug. And as I said a moment ago, that if you talk to any drug abuse counselor, they're going to tell you that 99.9% of the people that walk in their door started their addiction with marijuana. So it is a gateway drug. Not only is it a gateway drug from a physiological perspective, that you are now dependent on a drug, which puts you at greater risk to be dependent on other drugs if you were to use them. But in addition to that, marijuana today is very expensive. Heroin is cheap. So the kids start to experiment. They like the way they feel. They don't have enough money. They start using pills. Pills get expensive. And then one night they're like, oh, let me try this. This might work. And this ends up being heroin. And heroin's $5 a bag. So we can stop talking about two things. One is whether or not marijuana is addictive. It is. Secondly, is it a gateway drug? It absolutely is a gateway drug. Okay. Here's the other danger. There was a longitudinal study out. I've got a copy of it if anybody wants it. I think the year was 2012, I believe it was. And the research actually came out of New Zealand in collaboration with Duke University. And it was a longitudinal study where they looked at a group of individuals from the time they were in their teens into their early 30s. And they followed those individuals that both started smoking marijuana in their early years and didn't start smoking marijuana in their early years. And what they found was that those individuals that started smoking marijuana in their teens and smoked regularly, which was anywhere between 1 and 3 times a week, they found up to a 6 to 8 point drop in IQ. And that drop appears to be permanent. We need to have much more research in order to establish the cause and effect. Right now we understand that there appears to be a relationship. And here's why we think this, from a reasoning perspective, why it makes sense to us. It makes sense because the teen years are very, very sensitive, is a very, very sensitive time in brain development. So we used to think that you were born with all the brain cells you'd ever have, and then they just started to die off, and by the time you're my age, basically you're finished. Well, thank God that's not the case. We have a much more positive perspective, right, these days. So what we do know now is that right before your teen years, in your prepubescent years, your brain goes through this period of proliferation where it grows all these new nerve cells, which is what it actually does right before you're born as well. So it goes like right around 12, 13 years old, your brain grows all these new nerve cells. And then once you hit your teen years, those nerve cells start to die off. It's called pruning. And we want them to, All right, we don't want you to have all the brain cells you've ever created, because that's not a good thing either. What we want is only those cells that you really need in order to do what you do. Now, what influences the actual richness of the structure of brain cells and the number of brain cells is what you're doing with your brain at that period in time. The brain continues to develop for girls until about 21, 22. For boys, 25. We're thinking maybe even 30, honestly. And hopefully we'll get a better handle on that. But think about this. The part of the brain that is continuing to develop is primarily the prefrontal cortex, which is right here. And it's where all your higher order cognition is. It allows you to do all your complex problem solving, your planning, your decision making, all of that wonderful stuff. It's involved in attention and information processing and memory. And what we're seeing is some decrements in the development of the prefrontal cortex, as well as another area of the brain, which is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is like your central processing unit. Right? So, if you have this sensitive developing brain and you're bathing it in very high levels of THC, we're seeing a relationship between that and the actual information processing and mental capacity that you end up having as an adult. Great concern, great concern. And I'll add to that the research is also showing that technology is addictive and is also influencing the development of the brain. And one of the areas that we're seeing our kids are doing a lot of what we call multitasking, where they've got, 2 screens up here and another screen up there and a book open here, and they're talking to their friends here and studying here, and they got music going and they're okay. So let me just say to you that there is no such thing as multitasking. The brain is not capable of multitasking. Multitasking suggests that you're doing 2 tasks at the same time. We can't do that. As sophisticated as our brains are, what we're actually doing is we're bouncing back and forth from one task to another task to another task, and it's happening so quick you're not even aware of it. Well, these kids' brains are so facile and they're brilliant at being able to bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But what we're finding is that there's a cost. There's a cost to that, what we call multitasking. And so far, one of the things that we're seeing in research that's being done on rats is that the cost is that the brain cells in the hippocampus, we're not seeing the same level of proliferation in those brain cells as we do in brains that are not engaged in that level of multitasking at that young age. So fewer brain cells are being produced in the hippocampus. Now, fast forward to your older years. Where do we find damage, for example, when we do brain biopsies and we're looking for damage related to dementia, Alzheimer's in particular? We find a lot of damage in the hippocampus. We know that the more brain cells you have going into your elderly years, the less likely you are to suffer from dementia. So if we are handicapping our children by allowing them to engage in technology and multitask the way they are, and they're actually coming out of childhood with fewer brain cells in their hippocampus, are they at risk later on, or higher risk later on for dementia? We don't know. Logically, it suggests that that may be the case. All right? So what these children are doing with their brains at these ages influence the development. So a brain that's playing an instrument and is engaged academically and is social, good nutrition, nice exercise, that's one brain. A brain of a young child that's isolated, playing violent video games 5 hours a day, not engaging academically or socially, that's a different brain. We're also finding with the marijuana these days, there was just an article today, research that came out, showing that So we all have a reward system in our brain. It's a dopamine-based reward system. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. And when you're in your teen years, your reward system is particularly sensitive. What I mean by that is when you do something new that's really engaging and exciting, you get this burst of dopamine. That's a reward. It's like, bam, that felt really good. So whatever feels good to us feels really good when we were in our teen years, like much better in our teen years. You guys can remember that, you know, when you're enjoying something like your favorite ice cream, that dopamine is just, you know, it's like, oh my God, this is so good, right? So here's what they're finding. There is something called GABA in your brain, and the GABA is produced in such a way that it helps to ameliorate that rush of dopamine. So we don't want too much dopamine, because if we keep getting these rushes of dopamine, we're at a much higher risk for addiction. So when you're in your teen years, you are at a much higher risk for addiction because your reward system is so incredibly sensitive. As you get older, you build up regulatory fibers that actually allow your brain to slow things down. Even though you're thinking this is going to feel really good, your brain slows things down, you're able to make better decisions. Another reason that we're able to control that reward system better is because of this GABA that's produced. What they're finding with individuals who smoke pot is it influences the production of GABA. So it actually reduces the amount of GABA that's produced, which allows the dopamine system to continue to be overstimulated, which puts you at greater risk for addiction. So, is it a gateway drug? Yes, absolutely. Is it addictive? Yes. Okay, so great concern there. All right, alcohol. Drinking by underaged kids has declined, including binge drinking. That's good. Men are more likely to binge drink. We're also seeing a decline in drunk driving with the younger populations. Fewer individuals are smoking cigarettes, and but other forms of tobacco are remaining popular. So we're seeing an increase in e-cigs. You know, it's just the corporate America's got to keep making money. So they're going to keep, now that, you know, they had the e-cigs, and now you can use the e-cigs as an alternative drug delivery system. So you can smoke marijuana. I mean, it's madness. Marijuana has the highest rate of dependence or abuse among all drugs, second only to alcohol. That's the reality, okay? 4.2 million people in this country met clinical criteria for dependence on marijuana, more than 2 times than for prescription pain relievers and nearly 5 times that for cocaine. Yet, even though that's the case, we see a decrease in the perceived risk among teens and their parents related to that specific drug. Related to that specific drug, we see a decrease. And we actually see it over the course of if you look at junior high, the junior high parents and kids are like, oh, you know, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. And then as they go into high school, you know what starts to happen? The perception goes down. So all of a sudden, kids start freshman year, oh, it's probably okay if they experiment a little bit with marijuana. Oh, it's all right. And by their time the senior year, the parents are accepting of the use of marijuana. I see it all the time. Connecticut we struggle in this state, all right? Top 10 state for the dependence on illicit drugs for individuals between 18 and 25. Top 10 in this country. We're a tiny little state. Fast becoming the state with the highest overall demographic of drug abuse that crosses age, race, and class. In Little Connecticut. Despite attempts by Connecticut officials over the past 10 years, Connecticut has the highest percentage of combined alcohol and heroin abuse than almost any other state in the nation. It has tripled over the last 10 years. still a significant population that are using illegal prescription drugs. And in 2014, 4,000 people in our state sought treatment for marijuana addiction. We have one of the highest youth populations using alcohol, marijuana, and heroin. Estimated use of rate for 12 to 18 years old is 78% have tried marijuana within the past year, 64% reporting trying heroin. 60% use marijuana and or illegal prescription drugs within the last 30 days. So, do you think we need to start talking to our kids? Yeah. So when do you start? You start as long as you feel like your child can start to at least listen a little bit. 3rd grade, you start talking to them. Now, are you going to sit down at any stage in your child's development with a PowerPoint presentation and ask them to please sit down in the kitchen with some popcorn, and we're just going to spend the next 3 hours and I'm going to tell you all about drugs and alcohol? No, it isn't going to work. So a few things about having these conversations with your kids. First of all, you want to keep them short, really short. Sometimes they're going to be 3 minutes. Sometimes it's just going to be a passing comment. Sometimes it's going to be something you read in the news that you're bringing up at dinner and you're going to have conversation and ask them questions about. There's actually some conversation starter suggestions for you in your handout. But keep it short, okay? Kids do not want to hear you lecture. And if it's possible to engage them in such a way where you're not necessarily the authority on the subject, but instead you're asking them questions and then slipping in little pieces of information here and there. Now, here's what the kids do. When they're old enough to have access on the internet, they will start to do their own research. And I get this with kids that come into my practice, and maybe their parents sent me because they're smoking marijuana or whatever, and of course they don't want to be there. And they come in and they sit down and they're like, don't tell me, Dr. Farrell, about, marijuana. I know all about it. I've already been reading about it. I'm like, that's cool, good. Why don't you tell me, educate me? Maybe you know something I don't know. I had this one young man tell me, well, I don't know if you know this, but marijuana cures cancer. I'm like, holy cow, cures cancer, cures cancer. I was like, you're kidding me. That's amazing. I did not know that. Where did you read that? Well, I read that on cannabis.com. They had an article in there, and there was research and the blah, the blah. And I'll say, well, that's really, so you don't want to shame them, right? And they're like, what the hell, cannabis.com? So that's interesting, cannabis.com. I wonder where that, can you pull that up for me? Let's take a look at where that research was done. And they pull it up, and obviously it's not anywhere that's reputable. It's not a peer-reviewed journal article. It's not, and then so you say, I really tend to go to the Mayo Clinic website for my information. Those guys are, they're top-notch in the country. You might want to go there sometime, take a look. Because there are a few things that are going on out there that aren't so great about this drug. And then you don't say any more. And they're kind of like, well, what's that? Oh, you're interested, you want me to tell you? Oh, all right, I'll tell you a few things. And then so the more you can get them to drive the bus on the conversation, the more likely they are going to be to listen to these little bits of information that you throw out, okay? All right. Parents have the most influence over whether or not their kids use or abuse drugs and alcohol. So our communities do the best job that they can. Our schools do the best job that they can. But it's not our community and our schools' responsibility. It's the parents' responsibility. So we had this panel, this is actually, we had a panel of teens that we got together several years ago in Old Saybrook. And one of the things that we were talking about was sex education. And I'll never forget this young man. He said, yeah, you guys, meaning parents, he said, you think that you talked to us one time or we've got our health class and that's enough. You know, that's it. So the kids, what do the kids go through? The drug prevention program? DARE. They go through DARE. And parents think that they go through DARE in middle school. And here's what the kids on this panel said. It's like, you know all the kids on the, in middle school that won the DARE essay contest? Those are the kids in high school that are abusing drugs and alcohol. Because most of the middle schoolers are really like, oh, I'd never do that. I mean, developmentally, they're like, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. I would never do that to myself. Of course, these are the facts. And then they hit the teen years, right? And their brain starts to shoot off all this dopamine, and they're getting all confused about what's right and wrong, and they're taking risks, and we've stopped talking to them. We're not educating them. We're not drawing them out. We're not having conversations. We're thinking they learned everything they needed to know, and when they were in 8th grade or 7th grade, there was no way they'd ever do that. Not my little, you know. I get parents that come in, oh no, that they're going through DARE. They love DARE. They're so good. They wrote this beautiful essay about how they'd never put drugs and alcohol in their body. Okay, well, I'll see you in about 6 months. We'll have that conversation again. Okay. So why is it so hard for us to have these conversations? And let me just give you some ideas about why it is so hard. First of all, we don't feel prepared and knowledgeable ourselves. So we feel intimidated right out of the gate. And as I said, we depend on our communities and our schools to educate our children. We're not sure where the boundaries need to be. How, and in this day and age, it's never been so complicated. Where are those boundaries? You can't lock down on a teen. You can't just say, okay, that's it. We're going to keep you in this little bubble until you're 21 or 25 and your brain's fully developed, and then we're going to let you out. And then, you know, breathe a sigh of relief. And most likely you won't become an addict at that point because your brain's already cooked, right? We can't do that. We have to allow our children some flexibility and some opportunity to experiment out there in the world. Very scary proposition in this day and age to know where those boundaries need to be. So you need to look at your own family. And I would never profess to tell you where those boundaries need to be because every family is going to be different. You have to look at your values. You have to look at your kids. You know your kids best. You may have children that are just those energetic, high-risk kids and they get into the teen years and they're banging all over the place. So you may decide to have different boundaries with those kids rather than a quiet child. Now I will tell you the quiet kids sometimes are the ones you got to really watch out for because you don't know what they're doing. But you need to make these decisions for yourself based on what your values are, your parenting style, your family history. So if you have a real clear, and we all have addiction in our families because guess what? We're all kind of addicts. Anybody drink coffee? Yeah. All right, so you're addicted to caffeine if you drink every day and you have to have your cup of coffee. So that dopamine system is there for all of us and it provides all of us with rewards. So there's addiction in just about every family. But if you see like a real history where it's like great-grandma, great-grandpa on that side, aunt on this side, this, that, then you want to kind of take stock of that. And you might want to start talking to your children about the fact that we have a line of addiction in the family, and this is what addiction is, and this is one of the reasons why you might want to, think of moderation when it comes to most things. So pay attention to that. So another reason that we don't have these conversations is you're not sure what you think a drug is and the difference between drug use, misuse, and abuse. So understand that for yourself. Understand what is a drug and what isn't a drug. Caffeine is a drug, by the way. You could have this conversation with your child. You could do a little research online with them and go, let's see how many drugs we could come up with that are in the house. All right, we got alcohol. Okay, we got, your father smoked cigarettes. We got coffee in the we've got sugar. Okay, not that sugar is a drug necessarily, but it certainly can be addictive. So sometimes when we feel like we don't know enough about what a drug is, or the difference between using a drug and abusing a drug, we're going to hesitate having these conversations. We feel like a hypocrite. There's another reason, because we have a glass of wine every night, And we've got teens in the house, and they're like, well, what, you're talking to, you're holding a glass of red wine talking to me about how I shouldn't smoke pot or I shouldn't have a drink. Well, you're a hypocrite, right? So a lot of parents feel like, how can I have these conversations with my kids when I'm actually ingesting a drug myself? You'll want to trust your kid. That's another reason. You don't want to have to get involved. You want to trust them and think they're going to make the right decisions. You don't know why kids turn to drugs or what to look for. So kids turn to drugs because of peer pressure, obviously, because of stress, because of anxiety, because of depression, because they're curious, because, all right? A lot of parents feel powerless. They feel like they're just not going to have influence anyway. My kid doesn't even hear half of the stuff I say. I can have this conversation with them. It's just going to go over their heads. They're not even going to pay attention. So why should I even bother? All right, so here's what you need to do in terms of setting your expectations about these conversations. You are not going to know whether your child is paying attention. You're not going to know if your child is hearing anything you're saying or getting anything you're saying, because that is the nature of parenting. They're not going to say, oh, geez, Mom and Dad, I just really appreciate the time you spent with me tonight talking to me about drugs and alcohol, and I'd just like to thank you for the information because now I can make an educated choice. And I'm thinking I'm not going to do these things because they just do not sound safe. You are never going to hear that from your child. If you hear that from your child, you better check their room for drug paraphernalia because they are using already. All right? They are trying to snow you. And isn't this the Scrooge of parenting, that you don't get the feedback, you don't get the support? You have to have faith. In all of your parenting techniques, you have to have faith that if you're consistent and you back that consistency up with boundaries and expectations and unconditional love and knowledge, that you've done the best you can, and then your child is going to have to find their way amongst all the support you provided. So don't expect them. They'll probably say, oh, that's ridiculous. Even if they're pushing back and you're saying, this marijuana thing, and you give them some information around that, and they're like, that's ridiculous. I don't believe that. Don't fight with them. Don't get into this battle. You're never going to convince them. They could be saying that for lots of different reasons. They're just feeling defensive. They believe it. They're just teens and they're trying to be oppositional. Just let it be. Just say, look, I understand, and I respect the fact that you feel that way. But in this house, we have a drug-free policy. So you will not be doing drugs. And if you do, these are going to be the consequences. You start to have those conversations early on with your children. You can say to them things like, look, there are other things that you would not want to do a lot of. Like you're not going to take the toothpaste and eat it, right? You're just going to use it to brush your teeth. So, same thing with drugs. Some drugs are really helpful, and people use those drugs in moderation to relieve pain because they have a disease, because of this, because of that. But when you start to take those drugs at greater amounts, they become a problem. Same thing with toothpaste. It's okay to brush your teeth with it, but if you ate the whole tube, you'd probably have to stay home from school tomorrow because your stomach's not going to feel too good. So start to make those. That's another way to engage them in conversation. They're brushing their teeth, and you just say, yeah, that's kind of, we were talking about drugs the other day, and hey, I just wanted to draw that analogy for you. You wouldn't want to eat that whole tube, would you? It'd probably make you sick. Same thing if you took that, that bottle of aspirin I've got, and you took the whole thing. It's not going to be good for you, but you could have one or two if you have a headache. So, starting to have those kinds of conversations. Talking to your kids about anything, but particularly drugs and alcohol, gives you this awesome opportunity as a parent to do these things, to share and reinforce your family values, your boundaries and consequences, to get to know more about your child's world. So let's say you have a child in the community that has overdosed, and you're sitting down to dinner, and you can say, Johnny, I heard that Sammy overdosed and died. How are you feeling about that? Like, that's difficult, huh? And you draw your child out. You say, what would you do? Let's say the story is that Sammy was at a party and somebody offered him a pill, and they took the pill and it ended up being laced with something, and they died, they overdosed. They weren't addicted, they were just experimenting. Then you can start to have a conversation like this with your child. Well, what do you think he should have done in that situation? You know, so he's at the party and he wants to be like his peers, and he's feeling like he wants to have fun, he wants to try this out, and somebody comes up and he doesn't know that person and they give him something, and he's seen other kids at the party take that pill. What do you think he should have done at that point? And then you allow your child to express themselves. Don't judge them. Maybe they say, well, I mean, I'd probably take it. Of course you're thinking, oh my God, no, you know, but let them express themselves. And you say, you know, and they say, let's say they say, well, he shouldn't have taken it. And then you say, yeah, that would have been a really difficult decision in that moment, wouldn't it? Because there he is with his peers. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like, you know, you're kind of getting some pressure, not direct necessarily, but you're feeling like you want to be part of the group? Oh yeah, I was feeling like that at lunch the other day, and everybody was talking about the football game last night they watched on TV, and I hadn't watched it, and I felt like I was getting pressure, like I felt like I needed to watch the football game next time. Yeah, right, it's not easy, right? And so what you're doing there is you're getting to know your children's world with no judgment, no criticism, and they will start to invite you into their world. When they feel safe like that, they will start to invite you in. And then you'll have a better opportunity to start to share with them. So in a moment like that, let me tell you what works with kids. Now kids want to hear about how you failed. They love those stories. I love them. So any opportunity you have when you're engaged in conversation like this, and you know, say one of the, like Sammy, who overdosed at the party, you could say, you know what, when I was in high school, I was actually at a party one time, and LSD was real big back then, and everybody was taking LSD, and I felt an enormous amount of pressure. And I, you know, let's say, you know, I chose not to, but I got to tell you, it was a really hard decision for me. I was very close to doing it, and then I pulled up and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I really felt like I was, you know, outside the group, and it wasn't a very good feeling. But I recognized afterwards that I made the right decision. So telling a story about yourself, and oh, okay, yeah, she's pointing at the clock, is a great way to align yourself with your children. And then you could ask them questions in relation to your own experience. So maybe it was a little different, your story, and say, what would you do in that situation? Because I got to tell you, man, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what to do, whether I should get in that car or not. And my buddy had been drinking. And all of a sudden they feel like, oh my God, my parents went through this too. You're human to them. And they start to normalize and connect with you. Okay? So using your own experiences as well is a really great way of connecting with your children. Also gives you an opportunity to teach problem solving and decision making, reinforce your respect and your love and your trust. It builds intimacy and trust in your relationship. And it also gives you an opportunity to educate your children on the laws and the consequences. So if you have children that tend to be they just feel very deeply sensitive kids, and these kinds of conversations are very intense for them, and they tend to shut down. What you might want to do is just leave like little things on their pillow. Like maybe there's a little article or something that you found, or you print something off the internet, or let's say you have like a one-sheet summary of the state laws in Connecticut in relation to driving intoxicated. And you just say, hey, I just left you something on your pillow. You might want to read it. Never, you don't have to ask them later, did you read that? What'd you get out of it? No, just leave it. Let them do their thing. Chances are they're gonna read it. They're never gonna let you know they did, but they're gonna digest the information. So a hands-off sort of approach as well can be really effective. Okay. All right, so let me just finish up here with a few things about making smart choices in relation to having these conversations, and then we'll stop. So first of all, make sure it's a good time to talk. So if they're studying for their chemistry exam that night or their midterms, it's probably not a good time to have this conversation. You want to also be very present. You want to be 100% present with your kids. So if you're having a really stressful time, you don't want to have the conversation when you're overly stressed or you're wigged out about something. Also, you don't want to have a conversation like this that's piggybacked off of something else that's just happened. So your kid comes home and you get their trimester grades and they're tanking in a couple classes, and you have a conversation with them about their academics, and then you say, oh, and by the way, we need to talk about drugs and alcohol. And the kid's gonna be like, yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. Make sure you gather your thoughts, all right? Be prepared to say very little and to listen very carefully. Right? So you don't want to be the one necessarily dominating the conversation. Make sure the content is age appropriate. Be calm and patient. Don't argue, judge, or criticize. Oh, this is another really great approach. And you could use this with your kids. Ask permission. The kids feel so respected when you do that. Ask permission. This will allow them to invite you. So if you say, you know what, honey, I wanted to talk to you about the fact that Sammy overdosed. Is that okay? Can we talk about that tonight at dinner? And if your child says, no, you know what, I honor that for now. Honor it. Say, okay, that's cool, that's cool. And then maybe a couple nights later you say, hey, can we have that conversation? Because there were a few things I just wanted to talk to you about, and I wanted to check in with you and see how you were feeling. So make sure you ask permission. And do that in many different situations of communication with your children. Ask them if it's okay. I still do that with my son, who's going to be 24. I'll get him on the phone and I'll say something like, hey, do you mind if I ask you some questions about work? Because I can, he shuts me down all the time because he's a young man. So, and then he'll say, yeah, go ahead. And then he's just more open. Okay? Keep it brief. We talked about that. Keep it positive and empathetic and understanding. Understand that this is a difficult time in your children's development, that their dopamine system is all jacked up, that they're not able to think rationally the way that we are. Lots of things are going on that's unique to this time in their development. You don't want the conversation to be a dictation. Ask questions. Check back or clarify with them. Does that make sense to you? Like if you say a little something about something, then you just say, does that make sense? And they'll say, no, I don't get any of that. And then try again. Or yeah, that's cool, I got it. Or you could say, I'm not sure I said that very well. Can I try that again? So you take responsibility for not being perfect, and then you ask them for permission. Make sure that you always encourage in these situations. So you want to say things to your child like, I know that wasn't easy. Let's say they share something with you about how they felt about Sammy overdosing. You say, I know that wasn't easy for you to talk about, but thanks for sharing with me. I'm here for you. I love you very much. Keep on trying. You'll get better. Keep on trying. You'll get better. I remember saying to my son in high school, you'll figure it out in relation to his academics. And he said, well, what are you talking about? And I said, you'll figure out that when something's important to you and you put effort in, you'll do better. So I wasn't like, oh my God, I can't believe you're failing out of this. It's like, we're here to help. We're here to support you any way you can. You will figure it out. that sounds good to them. It's like, oh my God, you have faith in me? You really think I can do that? Yeah, you'll figure it out. It may not be next semester, it may not be this year, but you'll figure it out. It'll be okay. Things like, I like the way you did that. Notice that your children are doing things that maybe you see an expression of your family values. And you say, hey, you know what? I saw you at the basketball game the other night, and I noticed that when that older woman dropped her glasses, you picked them up for her. That was really very thoughtful. That was a very thoughtful thing to do. Good for you. Oh my God, that feels so good. So recognize that with your kids. You always want to look for more positive than negative. We tend to get stuck in the negative. It's like driving down the road, and do we recognize all the times that all the other drivers are doing the right thing? And we're like, yeah, thank you very much. You know, you made that right turn with your blinker, and oh, by the way, I really appreciate the fact that. No, what we respond to, what we remember are the drivers that do those knuckle-headed moves, which all of us have done, but when someone else does it, it's like no one else but that person has ever done it on the planet. And we tend to get in that same mode with our kids. We tend to get in the mode of recognizing what they're doing wrong, and by continually pointing that out to them, we're reinforcing the negative behavior, rather than ignore the regular behavior or the negative behavior and reinforce the positive, even if it's really tiny, tiny increments of improvement in behavior. Our children don't change in big chunks. They change in little tiny chunks. Okay? So you want to make sure you do that. If you see your kid and your kid happens to be studying really hard for an exam, and you notice they're a couple hours at the dining room table studying, say to them, wow, I saw you really working hard in there. What are you working on? Oh, I got a chemistry exam. Well, you sure put the time in. Good luck. Let me know how that goes. Or, can I help you? Do you need me to quiz you? No, I'm good. All right, great. So, little things like that as parents go a long way. They come home from a party, they're not drunk, they're not high. You just, most of the time we're like, oh, okay, shh, don't say anything, don't say anything. But instead you might want to reinforce it. You might want to say, hey, you know what? I'm proud of you. You came home the other night from that party. You probably had a really good time, right? And I'm sure there were kids drinking, and there was probably some drugs there. And you chose not to engage in that behavior. And I just want to tell you, I'm real proud of you. I'm proud of you for respecting yourself. That feels good, right? So what are you saying to a child when you say that to them? You're saying, this is on you. You deserve, you're worthy. You are of value, and the choice that you made was reflective of your worthiness. Not you did it, oh, I'm so proud of you that you did everything I told you to. Right? That's not going to feel great to the kid. But when you tell them that, wow, I'm proud of you for respecting yourself like that, that's going to feel really good. And what the last thought I want to leave you with is, have fun. We've lost all the fun. Have fun. Like, do the fun stuff. Do silly stuff. Play tricks on your kids. We used to play tricks all the time on Clay. And my husband and Clay would play tricks on me all the time. But have a sense of fun. The thing with fun is that it takes time. And we are filling our lives to the point, and are filling our children's lives. There's no time to just have fun, to just be. All the research, so there's research out of Columbia University. They did some research on drug prevention, and they looked at all kinds of different variables for relationships between kids' use and this and that and the other. And you know what came up #1 as a preventative technique? In family dinners.
Oh, God, yeah.
That's it. Family dinners. Everything else was below significance on the statistical scale. Having family dinners was the strongest preventative thing you can do. And you know why? Because you're having conversation, you're building respect, you're getting to know your kid, they're getting to know you, you're having fun, you're breaking bread together.
And the whole family is there.
And the whole family is there, and you're learning to communicate. it's a very magical time. And so if you do nothing else, have family dinners. Even if you're just sitting there staring at each other. Thanks for coming tonight in this weather. Thank you so much.